The medical bay of the rebel frigate Redemption hummed with the quiet efficiency of Bacta tanks and diagnostic equipment. John Gray floated in the largest tank, her red hair drifting like seaweed in the translucent blue fluid. The Phoenix marks, faint golden patterns that hadn't been there before, traced across her skin like circuit pathways, pulsing softly with each breath. Charles Xavier sat vigil beside her tank, his hand pressed against the transparent steel, his telepathy maintaining a constant, gentle connection. She was stable. She was alive. She was changed. "Professor." Hank McCoy's voice carried urgency as he entered, his blue fur bristling with barely contained agitation. He carried a datapad displaying readings that made his scientific mind reel with implications. "We need to convene the team immediately. The situation is unprecedented." Charles didn't turn from Jean's tank. "Show me." Hank activated a holographic projection. It displayed the galaxy as a web of glowing lines, the Force itself, mapped through sensor data and quantum field analysis. But where the lines should have been uniform, there were now 8 distinct disruption points, each one corresponding to a location where the X-Men had used their powers extensively. And at the center, where Sullust burned in the display, was something that made Charles's telepathic senses recoil. The Phoenix event didn't just stabilize the dimensional fractures, Hank explained, his voice tight. It fundamentally altered the Force's topology in this region of space. John's cosmic energy has interwoven with the Force itself. They're becoming entangled on a quantum level. What does that mean in practical terms? "It means," Hank said grimly, "that every Force-sensitive being within 50 light-years can feel her. Not as a disturbance, but as a new presence in the Force. Something that shouldn't exist, but does. The Jedi would have investigated this immediately. The Sith," he paused, "the Sith will see it as either a weapon to claim or a threat to eliminate." Charles finally turned to face him. "How long before this becomes critical?" "It already is critical. I'm detecting Imperial probe droids in this sector, and their search pattern suggests they're not looking for the rebel fleet. They're looking for the source of the Force anomaly. They're looking for Jean." In the Redemption's briefing room, the X-Men assembled. Scott sat close to the viewport, his modified visor reflecting the stars. Logan stood in the corner, arms crossed, his enhanced hearing already having picked up the increased chatter on the rebel communications channels. Aurora and Kurt spoke quietly in French, their expressions grave. Rogue sat apart, still recovering from her absorption of the Phoenix-touched memories, occasionally staring at her bare hands as if seeing them for the first time. General Dodonna stood at the holotable alongside Mon Mothma's shimmering blue hologram. The rebel leaders looked exhausted, the weight of impossible decisions evident in every line of their faces. "The situation has changed," Dodonna began without preamble. "In the 3 days since Sullust, we've lost contact with 5 rebel cells. 2 were destroyed by Imperial forces. 3 simply vanished. No distress calls, no survivors. Just gone." "And you think this is connected to us?" Scott said. It wasn't a question. Mon Mothma's hologram nodded. "Imperial intelligence has designated you priority Omega targets. The bounty has increased to 200 million credits, alive only. They want you intact." She paused. "But it's worse than that. We've intercepted coded transmissions from Coruscant. Emperor Palpatine has issued a direct command. Find the source of the Force corruption." Those were his exact words. "Force corruption," Charles repeated softly. "He sees us as a disease. You're beings of power outside his control, Mon Mothma replied. To a Sith Lord who has spent decades manipulating the Force to rule the galaxy, your very existence is an existential threat. He won't rest until you're either controlled or eliminated. Logan's claws extended an inch. Let him try. He already is, Dodonna said, activating the holotable. A dozen faces appeared, the galaxy's most notorious bounty hunters. Boba Fett has assembled a coalition. IG-88, Bosk, Dengar, even Black Chrysanthemum. They're pooling resources, sharing intelligence. They know they can't take you individually, so they're hunting you as a pack. And there's something else, Hank interjected, bringing up his sensor data. The dimensional instability I warned about? It's not healing. In fact, every time we use our powers, especially Jean's Phoenix Force, it tears the fabric of reality a little more. We're on borrowed time. Eventually, the fractures will cascade, and this entire sector of space will collapse into dimensional chaos. The room fell silent. The implications were staggering. How long? Charles asked. Weeks. Maybe less if there's another major power event. Hank's eyes met Jean's through the viewport showing the medical bay. If the Phoenix manifests again at full power, it could trigger an immediate collapse. Scott stood abruptly. Then we find a way home. Now, before we destroy this galaxy just by being here. I'm working on it, Hank assured him. But dimensional translocation requires technology and energy sources that don't exist in this universe. I'd need to essentially recreate the conditions of our original displacement. A perfect storm of mutant powers, cosmic energy, and reality-warping technology. Even with the rebellion's resources, it's a monumental challenge. Then we give you whatever you need, Dodonna said firmly. We'll divert ships, personnel, equipment. At what cost? Ororo interrupted, her voice carrying the weight of moral conflict. General, your rebellion is already stretched thin. Every resource you give us is one taken from your war against the Empire. How many worlds will fall while we chase a way home? The question hung in the air, like a guillotine blade. Storm's right, Logan growled. We've been focused on survival, on getting Jean back, on not dying. But we ain't talked about the bigger picture. We're here. We got power. And there's a war on between freedom and fascism. Sound familiar to anyone else? Logan, Charles began. No, Chuck. We all feel it. We've seen what the Empire does. Slavery, genocide, tyranny. It's Genosha all over again. It's the Sentinels with a different paint job. Logan's voice was steel. Question is, are we X-Men? Or are we just survivors looking out for ourselves? Kurt teleported to the center of the room with a soft bamf, his yellow eyes earnest. Logan speaks truly. We have always fought for those who cannot fight for themselves. Does it matter if they are human, mutant, or Twi'lek? He stumbled over the alien word. Oppression is oppression. And suicide is suicide. Scott countered, his voice hard. We're 8 people against a galactic empire. We can't win this war. It's not our war to win. Our responsibility is to get home before we accidentally destroy this entire sector of space. Rogue finally spoke, her Mississippi accent thick with emotion. Scott, honey, I absorbed Jean's memories when I touched the Phoenix. I saw what she saw. This galaxy is dying. The dark side is a cancer and it's spreading. The rebellion's brave, but they're losing. Without something to change the equation. She trailed off, but her meaning was clear. Charles raised his hand, commanding silence. We will not make this decision in haste or under pressure. But we must acknowledge the reality. Our presence here has consequences. We've already changed this galaxy simply by existing in it. The question is whether we change it purposefully or allow our presence to cause chaos. There's a third option, Hank said quietly. All eyes turned to him. I've been analyzing the dimensional breach that brought us here. If I'm correct, it wasn't entirely random. Something pulled us here, or someone. There may be a reason we're in this specific galaxy at this specific time. Destiny? Kurt asked hopefully. The will of God? Or the will of the Force? Hank replied. I can't prove it. But the probability of our displacement landing us in a galaxy currently engaged in a fight remarkably similar to our own struggles? The odds are astronomical. We may have been brought here for a purpose. Before anyone could respond, alarms shrieked throughout the ship. A rebel officer's voice crackled over the intercom. General, multiple contacts dropping out of hyperspace, Imperial signatures and bounty hunter vessels. We're surrounded. On the bridge, the viewport filled with ships. 3 Imperial star destroyers formed a distant perimeter, their turbo lasers tracking but not firing. They were the anvil. Closer in, nearly 24 smaller vessels circled like sharks. The Slavewachen, the Hound's Tooth, the Punishing One, and others. The bounty hunters had found them, and they'd brought friends. A crackling transmission filled the bridge, Boba Fett's modulated voice carrying cold professionalism. X-Men, you are surrounded and outgunned. Power down your vessel and prepare to be boarded. You have 5 minutes to comply before we open fire. Your choice. Surrender now, or we collect what's left of you from the wreckage. Charles felt the team's emotions through his telepathy. Scott's tactical analysis, Logan's eagerness for a fight, Ororo's gathering storm, Kurt's fear tempered by faith, Rogue's determination, Hank's racing calculations. And beneath it all, Jean's slowly awakening consciousness in the medical bay, the Phoenix stirring at the scent of danger. They'd won one battle. Now the war had truly begun. And somewhere in the depths of space, aboard his personal meditation chamber on Coruscant, Emperor Palpatine smiled. His prey had been cornered. Soon, he would understand what they were, and then he would break them. The bridge of the redemption erupted into controlled chaos. Rebel officers shouted trajectory calculations, while shield generators whined to full power. General Dodonna's weathered hands gripped the tactical console, his military mind racing through scenarios that all ended in variations of catastrophe. We can't fight them all, he stated flatly. Even with your abilities, we're outnumbered and outgunned. If we run, the Star Destroyers will track us through hyperspace. If we stand and fight, we'll be torn apart. Then we don't run, and we don't fight, Charles said, wheeling forward. His telepathy was already reaching out, touching the minds of hundreds of beings across the assembled fleet. Bounty hunters, Imperial officers, rebel crew. We negotiate. Negotiate? Logan barked a harsh laugh. With mercs who only speak credits and an empire that wants us in chains? Not negotiate our surrender, Charles clarified. Negotiate their survival. Scott understood immediately, his tactical mind aligning with the professor's strategy. A demonstration. Show them the cost of taking us exceeds the bounty. Precisely. But it must be carefully calibrated, enough to establish deterrence without triggering the dimensional instability Hank warned about. Charles looked to his team. Storm, I need a display of power that's impressive but controlled. Can you manage that? Ororo's eyes flickered white, then returned to normal. I can make them reconsider their life choices without summoning a hurricane. But Professor, these Star Destroyers have orbital bombardment capabilities. If they decide we're too dangerous to capture, then we make sure they understand we're too valuable to destroy. Charles activated the comm channel. Boba Fett, this is Charles Xavier. I'm willing to discuss terms. The bounty hunter's response was immediate. There are no terms. You surrender or you die. I'm offering you a third option. You leave now, with your ships intact and your crews alive. What I'm about to show you is a fraction of our capabilities. Observe. Charles nodded to Aurora. She closed her eyes, and the viewport filled with dancing lightning. On the bridge of the slave Rhyme, Boba Fett watched his sensors go haywire. The woman, Storm, according to Imperial intelligence, had exited the rebel frigate's airlock without a spacesuit. She hung in the void, surrounded by a sphere of what appeared to be breathable atmosphere, her white hair streaming in solar winds that shouldn't exist. She raised her hands. The electromagnetic fields between ships began to dance with aurora-like light. St. Elmo's fire crawled across the slave unit's hull, harmless but unsettling. Then Storm demonstrated her true power. She redirected a solar flare. A tendril of plasma, millions of degrees hot, curved away from the distant sun and lashed toward the fleet. It passed within a kilometer of the Hound's Tooth, close enough that Bosk's shields flared crimson with heat stress. The Trandoshan hunter's roar of alarm echoed across the comm channels. Storm guided the plasma tendril through the formation like a conductor directing an orchestra, close enough to every ship to make the point crystal clear. She could have incinerated any of them. Instead, she released the solar plasma harmlessly into space and flew back to the Redemption. The comm channels were silent for a long moment. Impressive, Fett finally said. But we fought Force users before. We've adapted. She's not a Force user, Charles replied. None of us are. We operate outside your galaxy's fundamental laws. Your force-dampening technology, your Isalamiri, your Sith alchemy. None of it works on us. You cannot counter what you cannot understand. Inside the Redemption's cargo bay, Kurt Wagner prepared for his part of the demonstration. How many jumps, Professor? As many as you can manage safely. Make them afraid, Kurt. Make them understand they have no safe spaces. Kurt grinned, his pointed teeth flashing. With pleasure. He teleported. Bamf. Kurt appeared on the bridge of the Punishing One, startling Dengar so badly the Corellian hunter nearly shot his own console. Kurt waved cheerfully, dropped a small device, Hank's design, a harmless holographic projector that would display the X-Men logo for the next hour, and vanished. Bamf. The bridge of Bosk's ship. Another device, another wave. Gone. Bamf, bamf, bamf. Ship after ship, Kurt materialized, demonstrated that their hulls meant nothing, their security was a joke, and disappeared before anyone could react. On the 12th jump, he appeared directly in front of Boba Fett, standing on the bounty hunter's pilot console. Guten Tag, Kurt said pleasantly, his tail curling around Fett's targeting computer and crushing it. The professor says hello and goodbye. He vanished with a final bamf, leaving behind the sulfur smell and the clear message. They could reach anyone, anywhere, anytime. Back aboard the Redemption, Kurt stumbled as he materialized, his energy depleted. Rogue caught him, her gloved hands steadying him. Easy, sugar. You did good. One more demonstration, Charles said quietly. Logan, if you would. Logan cracked his neck and headed for the airlock. Been waiting for this. From the bridge of the Star Destroyer Relentless, Captain Thrawn, a blue-skinned Chiss officer known for his tactical brilliance, watched the proceedings with analytical interest. Unlike his more brutish colleagues, he saw patterns where others saw chaos. These beings were making a statement, yes, but they were also showing remarkable restraint. "Captain," his sensor officer reported, "one of them has exited the rebel ship. He's just floating in space. No suit, no breathing apparatus." Thrawn leaned forward. "Magnify." The screen showed Wolverine, claws extended, slowly spinning in hard vacuum. Then the communications console chimed with an incoming message. Audio only, but the voice was rough, almost feral. "Name's Logan. Some of you know me as Wolverine. Here's what you need to understand. I can't be killed. Go ahead. Test it." Several bounty hunters took him up on the offer. Blaster fire lanced through space. Logan's body jerked as bolts struck him. Chest, head, limbs. He should have been dead. Instead, he just hung there, and the wounds closed. Steam vented from his body as the vacuum flash froze his blood, but the injuries sealed themselves within seconds. "Cute," Logan's voice crackled. "Now watch this." He pointed himself toward the Relentless and used a small thruster pack, Rebel design, improvised by Hank, to propel himself toward the Star Destroyer. The massive warship's point defense systems tracked him, but Thrawn raised a hand. "Hold fire. I want to see what he does." What Logan did was simple and terrifying. He magnetically attached himself to the Star Destroyer's hull, extended his claws, and began cutting. The adamantium blades sliced through the durasteel plating like it was thin plastic. In 30 seconds, he'd carved a hole large enough to enter the ship. He didn't. He just sealed it with an emergency patch he'd brought along, saluted the nearest viewport, and jetted back to the Redemption. The message was clear. Their ships were not sanctuaries. Nowhere was safe. Captain Thrawn tapped his chin thoughtfully. "Fascinating. They're showing us they could have killed us all at any point. This is not a threat. This is a warning wrapped in an offer." "Sir," his first officer asked, confused. "They're saying, we don't want to kill you, but we will if you force us to." It's quite civilized, actually. Thrawn activated his secure channel to Imperial Command. "I'm recommending we observe and study, not engage. These beings are more valuable as research subjects if we can isolate one without losing an entire fleet." On Coruscant, in the Emperor's throne room, Palpatine listened to the reports with cold fury. His bounty hunters were being humiliated. His Star Destroyers were being mocked. And worst of all, the beings responsible were demonstrating powers that operated completely outside the Force. "Unacceptable," he hissed to the hologram of Darth Vader. "They cannot be allowed to believe themselves untouchable. Recall the bounty hunters. Deploy the Inquisitors to shadow them, but do not engage. Not yet. What is your command, Master?" Palpatine's ancient eyes gleamed with malicious intelligence. "If conventional force cannot contain them, we will use a weapon they cannot counter with their mutant abilities. We will use attachment. Find those they have saved, the slaves from Zagaria, the rebels they have befriended. We will make them understand that their presence endangers everyone they care about. And if they flee, then we have tracking devices on every rebel ship in that fleet, thanks to Captain Thrawn's foresight. No matter where they run, we will find them. And when they are exhausted, isolated, and desperate." Palpatine smiled his death's head grin. "Then we will offer them a choice. Serve the Empire, or watch everyone they've touched burn." Back aboard the Redemption, the X-Men gathered in the briefing room as the bounty hunter fleet scattered, withdrawing beyond weapons range. They'd won the standoff, but everyone felt the hollow quality of the victory. "They'll be back," Scott said flatly. "We bought time, not safety." "Time is what we need," Hank replied, pulling up holographic schematics. "I've been reverse engineering the technology that brought us here. If I can recreate the dimensional breach in a controlled manner, I can open a stable portal home. But I need 3 things: a massive power source, exotic matter to stabilize the wormhole, and precise calculations of our home dimension's quantum signature." "How massive a power source?" Jean asked. She'd finally emerged from the medical bay, still weak but mobile. The phoenix marks on her skin had faded to faint tracings, visible only in certain light. Hank hesitated. "Roughly equivalent to a star's output for 0.7 seconds. Nothing in this galaxy's conventional technology can generate that kind of power in a burst." "Except the Death Star," Dodonna interjected grimly, "which the Empire is currently building a second one of." "Or the Phoenix Force," Jean said quietly. Everyone turned to stare at her. "I can feel it, Professor. When I reached out to stop the Inquisitor, when I opened myself to that much power, the Phoenix showed me something. It exists across dimensions. It's not bound to one universe. It could bridge the gap, if I could control it for just a few seconds." "Absolutely not," Charles said firmly. "Jean, you nearly destroyed a solar system last time. The risk is too great. The risk of staying might be greater," she countered. "Hank said our presence is tearing this dimension apart. Every day we stay, we do more damage. How many people die if we don't try?" The argument was cut short by alarms, again. But this time, they weren't proximity warnings. They were medical alerts from the rebel base on Dantooine. Dodonna's face went pale as he read the reports. No, this can't be." "What is it?" Charles demanded. "The base on Dantooine, the one where you stayed, it's..." Dodonna's voice cracked. "It's been attacked. Imperial forces, led by Inquisitors. They've taken hostages. Specifically, they've taken every rebel who had direct contact with you." On the screen, a hologram appeared. A pale, bald woman in black robes, the Grand Inquisitor herself, stood before a row of kneeling prisoners. Captain Vess was among them, bloodied but defiant. "X-Men," the Inquisitor said, her voice cold and precise. "You have 48 hours to surrender yourselves to Imperial custody. For every hour you delay, we will execute one hostage. We will broadcast each death across the HoloNet. The galaxy will see what happens to those who shelter you." The hologram showed Vess being dragged forward, forced to her knees. "Don't do it," she screamed. "Don't you dare give up for..." The hologram cut to black. In the briefing room, the silence was absolute. They'd known there would be consequences. They'd known the Empire would escalate. But seeing it, seeing people they'd fought beside now in chains because of them. "We have to go get them," Rogue said, her voice shaking. "We can't just leave them to die." "It's a trap," Scott replied, though his voice lacked conviction. "They're using hostages to draw us out." "Of course it's a trap," Logan growled. "Don't mean we ain't going. Since when do the X-Men leave people behind?" Charles closed his eyes, feeling the weight of leadership crushing down on him. Save the hostages and risk everything, or prioritize the mission to get home and let innocent people die. There was no good choice. There never was. "We have 48 hours, he finally said. "Hank, continue your research. The rest of us, we plan a rescue. We save our friends. Then we decide our future." But even as he said it, Charles knew the truth. The decision had already been made the moment the Inquisitors took those hostages. The X-Men would fight. They always did. And the Emperor was counting on it. The war room aboard the Redemption had transformed into a tactical nightmare. Holographic projections displayed Dantooine's surface, the captured rebel base marked in ominous red, surrounded by Imperial force concentrations that made even the most optimistic scenarios look suicidal. General Dodonna stood beside Mon Mothma's flickering hologram, both wearing expressions of grim resignation. The Grand Inquisitor has fortified the base, Dodonna explained, highlighting key positions. 4 AT-8s, 2 full stormtrooper battalions, TIE fighter patrols on constant rotation, and overlapping shield generators. She's turned your former safe house into an Imperial fortress specifically designed to counter your abilities. Counter our abilities? Scott studied the schematics, his tactical mind parsing details. How? They don't understand our powers. They don't need to understand them, Mon Mothma replied. They've analyzed your previous engagements, Storm Command's weather, so they've erected atmospheric dampeners that disrupt air currents. Nightcrawler teleports. So they've established gravitic interference fields that make spatial displacement dangerous. Wolverine heals. So they've prepared weapons designed to inflict damage faster than regeneration can compensate. Hank adjusted his glasses, studying the defensive arrays with grudging admiration. Fascinating. They're adapting doctrine without understanding underlying principles, treating our abilities as tactical variables rather than trying to counter the source. Crude, but effective. They're learning, Charles said quietly. Every encounter teaches them more about us. Eventually, they'll develop countermeasures that actually work. Logan leaned over the holotable, claws scraping lightly against the metal surface. Don't matter. We ain't leaving Vess and the others to die. We go in hard, we go in fast. We extract the hostages and ghost before they know what hit them. Logan's right about the speed, Scott agreed. But hard and fast won't work here. Look at these choke points. They've designed the base layout to funnel us into kill zones. They want us to charge in. We need something they won't expect. Kurt's tail twitched thoughtfully. What if we do not fight our way in at all? What if we simply appear where they do not expect? The gravitic fields, Hank began, affect teleportation, yeah, I heard. But Professor Charles's telepathy, it is not affected by gravity, yes? Kurt's yellow eyes gleamed with inspiration. What if Professor Xavier makes the Imperials think we are attacking from the obvious direction, while I teleport a small team directly to the hostages? A psychic feint, Ororo said, understanding dawning. Charles creates an illusion of a full assault on the main entrance, while the real rescue team appears in the detention area. Jean finished. She'd been quiet since the hologram of the hostages, but now she leaned forward, the phoenix marks on her skin pulsing faintly. I can help. My telekinesis can mask Kurt's spatial displacement from their sensors. They'll never know he's jumping until it's too late. Charles studied his former student with concern. Jean, using your powers right now, given the dimensional instability, will be carefully controlled, she insisted. I'm not talking about unleashing the Phoenix. I'm talking about precision telekinesis, small scale, surgical. Nothing about the Phoenix is small scale, Scott interjected, his voice tight with worry. Last time you controlled it, you nearly burned the surface off a planet. Jean's eyes flashed. Literally, a brief flicker of golden fire. Last time, I was fighting it. Now we've reached an understanding. It knows you're important to me. It knows this matters. The Phoenix isn't just destruction, Scott. It's rebirth, transformation. And right now, those people need us to transform this situation. The room fell silent. Everyone could feel the tension between Jean and Scott. The unspoken fear that the woman he loved was becoming something beyond human. Something cosmic and unknowable. The plan has merit, Dodonna finally said, breaking the silence. But you'll need support. The rebellion can provide a diversionary attack, something credible enough to draw Imperial attention without committing so many forces that we can't retreat if things go badly. No, Charles said firmly. This is our operation. We won't ask the rebellion to sacrifice more people for us. You're not asking, Professor. We're volunteering. Mon Mothma's hologram straightened, her voice carrying the authority of a senator. Captain Vess and her team are our people. They were captured protecting our base. Yes, the Inquisitors are using them to bait you, but that doesn't make them any less our responsibility. Rogue spoke up from where she'd been quietly listening. There's something else we need to talk about. That Grand Inquisitor, she ain't just some Empire goon. I've been studying the Rebel intelligence files. She's Force-sensitive. Powerful. Maybe not Vader level, but close enough. Which means, Hank interjected, she may be able to sense Jean's Phoenix presence even through our stealth approach. The Force and the Phoenix are entangled now, remember? Every Force-sensitive in the sector can feel John like an itch they can't scratch. Logan grinned, feral and eager. So we give him something else to scratch at. I'll take point on the diversionary assault. Let the Inquisitor come at me. I've tangled with Vader and walked away. I can keep her busy. You fought Vader to a standstill for 3 minutes before he force-choked you unconscious, Scott reminded him. Don't let your ego write checks your healing factor can't cash. Boys? Aurora interjected, her tone that of a mother separating squabbling children. We do not have time for posturing. Logan will lead the diversion with myself and Rogue. Professor Xavier maintains the psychic illusion. Jean, Scott, Kurt, and Hank comprise the extraction team. Agreed? Charles looked around the table, reading the determination in each face. They'd made their choice. Not because it was smart, not because it maximized their chances of getting home, but because it was right, because the X-Men didn't abandon people. Agreed, he said. We move in 6 hours. That gives us time to... The door to the war room burst open. A rebel technician, young and terrified, stumbled in. General, we're receiving a priority transmission. It's coming from the base on Dantooine. They say they'll only speak to the X-Men. The holotable flickered, the tactical display replaced by a new image. The Grand Inquisitor stood in what had been the base's command center, now decorated with Imperial banners. Behind her, Captain Vess knelt, restrained and defiant. X-Men, the Inquisitor began, her voice eerily calm. I am designated as the third sister, elevated to Grand Inquisitor by the Emperor himself for my success in hunting Force-sensitives. Your presence fascinates me. Power without the Force. Abilities that defy the natural order. She began slowly circling Vess, a predator stalking prey. His Imperial Majesty has made me an offer. If I deliver you to Coruscant intact, I will be granted my freedom from the Inquisitorius. I will be released from my servitude. Such a prize is worth any effort. The Inquisitor stopped, one pale hand resting almost gently on Vess's shoulder. I am told you value mercy, compassion, that you fight for the weak and the oppressed, admirable qualities, exploitable qualities. She drew her lightsaber, the red blade igniting with a snap hiss. Vess didn't flinch, but her eyes widened with the realization of what was coming. "You have 48 hours," I said, but I find myself impatient. "Let's accelerate the timeline." The Inquisitor's blade moved toward Vess's throat. "You have 12 hours. For every hour of delay, I execute not one hostage, but 3. And I will start with..." The hologram distorted, the image breaking into static. When it cleared, something had changed. The Inquisitor was looking up, her expression shifting from cruel confidence to genuine alarm. The ceiling of the command center was bending. Metal and durasteel warped like taffy, twisting into impossible geometric shapes. Debris began to float upward, defying gravity. And standing in the doorway, her eyes blazing with golden fire, was a figure that shouldn't have been there. Jean Grey. But it wasn't Jean alone. The Phoenix Force wreathed her like a living flame, controlled but present. She'd teleported. No, she'd willed herself across light years, using the Phoenix's power to simply be where she needed to be. "You wanted our attention," Jean said, her voice layered with cosmic harmonics. "You have it. Now let them go." The transmission cut to black. In the war room, chaos erupted. Scott was already moving toward the door, his tactical mind abandoned in favor of pure panic. She went alone, without backup, without asking permission, Charles finished, his telepathy already reaching out across the void, finding Jean's mind light years away. What he sensed made his blood run cold. The Phoenix. She's bargaining with it, trading some measure of control for power. She thinks she can contain it long enough to rescue the hostages. "Can she?" Dodonna demanded. "I don't know," Charles admitted, and those 3 words carried the weight of his worst fears. On Dantooine, in the captured rebel base, the Grand Inquisitor backed away from the Phoenix-wreathed woman, her lightsaber raised defensively. Around them, stormtroopers opened fire, their blaster bolts simply stopping in midair, suspended by telekinetic force. "What are you?" the Inquisitor breathed. Jean tilted her head, studying the pale woman with eyes that held the memory of stars being born. "I'm what happens when you threaten my family. Last chance. Release the hostages, withdraw your forces, and I'll let you live." "You cannot threaten me. I serve the Emperor. I am protected by the dark side." Jean raised one hand, and the Inquisitor flew backward, slamming into the wall with bone-crushing force. Not killed, but definitely hurt. "The dark side is a candle flame compared to the Phoenix. Don't test me." The stormtroopers fled. The Inquisitor, struggling to breathe through cracked ribs, deactivated her lightsaber. In the detention cells below, Captain Vess and the other hostages felt their restraints simply dissolve, the metal flowing like water. Jean's Phoenix marks blazed brighter. "Run. Tell your Emperor. The X-Men don't negotiate with terrorists. We simply win." But as the Imperials fled, and the hostages scrambled toward waiting rebel shuttles that John had somehow summoned, the Phoenix-touched woman felt the price of her power. The dimensional fabric around Dantooine was screaming, reality itself straining under the weight of cosmic energy that shouldn't exist in this universe. She'd saved them. But at what cost? In deep space, Hank McCoy's instruments went berserk, detecting a reality fracture forming around Dantooine, massive, unstable, and growing. "Oh no," he whispered. "Jean, what have you done?" The Redemption's bridge became a symphony of alarm klaxons and panicked voices. Sensor displays showed the Dantooine system as a spreading wound in space-time. Reality itself was tearing, and at the center of the fracture stood Jean Grey, wreathed in Phoenix fire, surrounded by fleeing rebel shuttles carrying the rescued hostages. The dimensional instability is cascading. Hank shouted over the chaos, his blue fur standing on end as he frantically input calculations. Jean's Phoenix manifestation wasn't just a power surge. It was a catalyst. The fracture is expanding at exponential rates. If it reaches critical mass, it'll consume the entire star system. Charles had both hands pressed to his temples. His consciousness stretched across light years, maintaining contact with Jean's mind. What he felt there terrified him, not fear or loss of control, but cold calculation. John knew what she'd done, and she was preparing to do something even more dangerous. "She's planning to seal the fracture herself," Charles said, his voice hollow. "She's going to channel the Phoenix Force directly into the dimensional breach and cauterize it closed. But the energy required would require full Phoenix manifestation." Scott finished, his face pale behind his visor. "Which means she'd lose control. We'd have Dark Phoenix all over again, but this time in a universe that's already unstable." Kurt appeared on the bridge with a sulfurous bamf, having teleported from the cargo bay. "We must go to her. I can bring others. We make multiple jumps. The gravitic distortions around the fracture would tear you apart mid-teleport." Hank interrupted, highlighting the sensor readings. "Look at these space-time curvature values. You'd materialize inside solid matter or not materialize at all." Logan slammed his fist into the bulkhead, leaving a dent. "So, we just watch? Let Jeannie sacrifice herself while we stand here with our thumbs up "No," a voice said from the doorway. Everyone turned. Rogue stood there, her gloves already off, her expression set with grim determination. "There's another way. Professor, you said Jean's trading control for power, right? Bargaining with the Phoenix?" "Yes, but..." "Then she needs an anchor, something to hold on to while she's channeling that much energy. Something to remind her who she is." Rogue's bare hands trembled slightly, but her voice remained steady. "I can be that anchor. I can absorb some of the Phoenix energy, not all of it. Just enough to share the burden. And I can give her back memories of us, of home, of everything worth fighting for." "Rogue, the last time you absorbed the Phoenix, it nearly killed you," Scott protested. "You were unconscious for days. And I'd do it again in a heartbeat, sugar. That's what family does." Rogue looked at Charles. "You know I'm right. Jean needs someone who can touch the Phoenix and survive. Someone who's already been inside her head. That's me." Charles wanted to refuse. Wanted to find another solution that didn't require sacrificing one of his students to potentially save another. But his tactical telepathy was already running scenarios. And Rogue was correct. She was the only one who had even a chance of succeeding. "General Dodonna," Charles said, his voice heavy with command authority. "Get us to Dantooine. Maximum speed. Rogue, you're with me. Everyone else, prepare for emergency extraction. If this goes wrong..." "It won't," Aurora said firmly, though her eyes betrayed her fear. "Jean is strong, Rogue is strong, and we do not lose family, not today." On Dantooine's surface, Jean Grey stood at the epicenter of reality's death throes. The rescued hostages were away, safe aboard rebel shuttles that had already jumped to hyperspace. The Grand Inquisitor and her Imperial forces had fled in terror. And now Jean stood alone, facing a wound in the universe that she had created. The fracture was beautiful and terrible, a swirling vortex of colors that shouldn't exist, where the laws of physics bent and broke. Through it, John could see fragments of other dimensions, a world of endless ocean, a reality where stars sang, a universe that was nothing but screaming void. And the fracture was growing. "You must let me fix this," the Phoenix whispered in her mind, its voice like solar wind and cosmic fire. "Release control. Let me burn the wound closed. I can make this right." At what cost? Jean thought back, maintaining her mental barriers even as she felt them eroding. "How many worlds will you burn to save this one?" "As many as necessary." That is the nature of the Phoenix, death so that new life can grow. No. Jean's refusal was absolute. "I won't let you turn me into a weapon again. There has to be another way. There is no other way. You know this. The fracture will consume everything unless I..." The Phoenix's argument was interrupted by a new presence. Jean felt it through their cosmic connection, a familiar mind, approaching fast. Charles, and with him, Rogue. Hope and fear warred in Jean's chest. Hope that her family was coming. Fear of what she might become if she couldn't maintain control long enough for them to arrive. The Dantooine sky split open as the Redemption dropped from hyperspace, dangerously close to the planet's gravity well. It was a maneuver that violated every safety protocol, but there was no time for caution. A single shuttle launched immediately, burning toward the surface on maximum thrusters. "Hang on, John." Charles's telepathic voice cut through the Phoenix's whispers. "We're coming. You don't have to do this alone. Professor, I'm sorry. I know I should have waited, should have coordinated with the team. But when I saw that Inquisitor threatening Captain Vess, we'll discuss tactical protocols later. Right now, I need you to listen carefully. Rogue is going to absorb some of the Phoenix energy. It will stabilize you enough to seal the fracture without losing control." Jean's eyes widened. "No. Professor, you can't ask her to..." "I'm not asking." She volunteered. As she would say, that's what family does. The shuttle touched down 200 meters from Jean's position, its hull already showing heat stress from the dimensional distortions. The boarding ramp lowered, and Rogue emerged, running toward Jean with Charles's repulsor chair following behind. "Rogue, stop!" Jean shouted, her voice amplified by Phoenix power. "The fracture's radiation. You'll be torn apart before you reach me." "Then you better catch me, Red," Rogue called back, not slowing. She trusted John completely, trusted that her teammate wouldn't let her die. Jean reached out with telekinesis, creating a protective bubble around Rogue, shielding her from the worst of the dimensional distortions. The young woman crossed the remaining distance in seconds, stumbling slightly as reality twisted around her. "Okay," Rogue said, breathing hard. "Here's the plan, and I ain't taking no for an answer. You're gonna let me touch you, skin to skin. I'm gonna absorb enough Phoenix energy to share the load, and together we're gonna seal this thing. Then we're gonna get back on that shuttle and go home for a beer. Clear?" Jean's eyes shimmered with tears that turned to steam before they could fall. "It could kill you. The Phoenix isn't like other powers you've absorbed. It's alive, conscious, and it doesn't like being contained." "Good thing I'm stubborn as hell then." Rogue pulled off her remaining glove and extended her bare hand. "Trust me, Jeannie. Like I trusted you to catch me." Jean looked at that offered hand, pale, trembling slightly, but unwavering. She thought about all the times Rogue had been the team's wild card, the one who couldn't touch anyone without hurting them, who'd been so isolated by her power. And here she was, offering to touch something that could unmake her at the atomic level. That was what the X-Men were. That was what they'd always been. Jean took her hand. The connection was instantaneous and overwhelming. Rogue gasped as Phoenix energy poured into her. Not all of it. Jean maintained enough control for that, but enough that the burden became shared. Through their joined hands, they felt each other's memories. Jean's childhood discovering her telepathy, Rogue's first accidental absorption that put a boy in a coma, their first training sessions in the danger room, missions fought side by side, losses mourned together. And beneath it all, the Phoenix Force. Curious about this new vessel. Interesting, it whispered through both their minds. Two vessels, sharing the flame. This has never been done before. First time for everything, Rogue thought back, her mental voice strengthened by Jean's telepathic training. Now shut up and help us fix what we broke. The Phoenix laughed, a sound like supernovas being born. Very well. Let us see what two daughters can accomplish where one would burn alone. Jean and Rogue turned to face the dimensional fracture, their hands still joined, Phoenix fire wreathing them both now. Jean's golden white, Rogue's tinged with crimson. Charles reached out with his telepathy, linking their minds more firmly, becoming the anchor that would keep them from losing themselves in cosmic fire. Now, Jean shouted. They released the Phoenix Force in a controlled stream, pouring cosmic energy directly into the fracture. Not to burn it closed, but to heal it. To restore the dimensional boundaries that John's desperate teleportation had torn. It was delicate work, like stitching together soap bubbles, and it required absolute precision. The fracture resisted, wanting to expand, to consume. But John had the Phoenix's power of renewal, and Rogue had absorbed enough of Jean's control to help direct it. Together, they began to seal the wound in reality. On the Redemption, Hank watched his instruments with the intensity of a man witnessing a miracle. The fracture's stabilizing. They're actually doing it. The dimensional boundaries are re-knitting at the quantum level. But Scott saw something else, something that made his blood run cold. Hank, look at their energy signatures. They're burning out. At this rate, they'll consume themselves before the seal is complete. Logan was already moving toward the hangar. Then we go down there and drag them back before they do something stupid like dying for us. Wait. Hank grabbed his arm with surprising strength. Look, something's happening. On the planet's surface, as Jean and Rogue poured the last of their shared Phoenix energy into sealing the fracture, the impossible happened. The dimensional breach, instead of simply closing, began to crystallize. The ragged tear in reality transformed into something solid and structured, a gateway, stable and controlled. Through it, for just a moment, everyone could see. Earth. Their Earth. The X-Mansion, specifically, its familiar grounds visible through the interdimensional window. "Professor!" Jean cried out, her voice raw with desperate hope. "The fracture, when we sealed it, we created a bridge. We could go home, right now." Charles stared at the gateway, his telepathy confirming what his eyes saw. It was real. It was stable. And it was closing, the crystallized structure already beginning to fade, as the dimensional boundaries finished healing. They had perhaps 60 seconds before the gateway closed, forever. "Everyone to the shuttle," Charles commanded. "Full team extraction. We're going home." But even as the order left his lips, another alarm shrieked across the comm channels. General Dodonna's voice, tight with barely controlled panic. "Professor, we have incoming. Imperial fleet just dropped from hyperspace. 3 star destroyers, led by the Executor. Vader's flagship. They're launching everything they've got. TIE fighters, landing craft. They're burning toward Dantooine on attack vector, ETA 4 minutes. Through the crystallizing gateway, the X-Mansion stood peaceful and serene, bathed in Earth's familiar sunlight. Home, safety, everything they'd fought to return to. But behind them, the rebel fleet that had sheltered them was about to face Darth Vader's fury. The hostages they'd just rescued were aboard ships that the Empire would tear apart. The rebellion that had trusted them, helped them, bled for them, was about to pay the price for that alliance. 60 seconds to get through the gateway. 4 minutes until the Empire arrived. Not enough time for both. Charles Xavier looked at his X-Men, battered, exhausted, longing for home, and saw the same terrible understanding in each of their eyes. They could save themselves, or they could save their friends, but not both. "Professor," Scott said quietly, his hand on Charles's shoulder. "What do we do?" The gateway shimmered, beginning to fade. Earth waited on the other side, and behind them, the rebel fleet prepared to die, defending them. Charles Xavier closed his eyes, feeling the weight of leadership crushing down on him once more. The gateway to Earth hung in the Dantooine sky like a wound in reality, crystalline edges already beginning to dissolve. Through it, the X-Mansion's grounds were so close, Charles could almost smell the freshly cut grass, could almost hear the sounds of students training in the distance. Home. After everything they'd endured, home was 60 seconds away. "Professor." Logan's voice was quiet, but it carried across the shuttle's open ramp. "You know what we gotta do." Charles opened his eyes, looking at each of his X-Men in turn. Scott, still staring at the gateway with desperate longing. Jean and Rogue collapsed against each other, Phoenix energy finally spent. Kurt, his tail wrapped around his own waist in a gesture of self-comfort. Aurora, her expression serene despite the impossible choice before them. Hank, already running calculations on his datapad, even though they all knew the answer. 4 minutes until the Imperial fleet arrives, Charles said, his voice steady despite the breaking of his heart. Even if we could get everyone through the gateway in time, every rebel ship, every rescued hostage, we'd lead the Empire directly to Earth. Vader would follow. The Empire would discover our home universe. And they'd burn it, Scott finished. Sentinels were bad enough. An entire galactic empire with planet-killing superweapons? He shook his head. "We can't risk that." "So that's it?" Rogue's voice was raw, exhausted. "We just stay, give up our chance to go home?" "No," Jean said softly, struggling to sit upright. The phoenix marks on her skin were fading, but her eyes still held traces of cosmic fire. "We're not giving up anything. We're choosing. That's different." Through the shuttle's viewport, they could see the rebel fleet beginning evasive maneuvers. The Redemption and its escort frigates were hopelessly outgunned by 3 star destroyers. This was going to be a slaughter unless something changed the equation. "Hank," Charles said, "how long until the gateway closes completely?" 47 seconds and counting. The dimensional boundaries are re-establishing themselves rapidly. Once the crystallization completes, the path home will be sealed. Hank looked up from his datapad, his brilliant mind already ahead of Charles's reasoning. "But if we're staying, Professor, we need to ensure the gateway closes properly. Any residual instability could allow the Empire to reverse engineer the breach." "Which means?" Logan asked. "Which means one of us needs to remain here, pour enough energy into the gateway to ensure a clean seal. No trace, no possibility of reopening from either side." Hank's voice was clinical, but his eyes betrayed emotion. It would require someone with significant power, telekinetic or reality warping capability, and it would likely kill them. The shuttle fell silent except for the hum of engines and the distant wail of proximity alarms. "I'll do it," Jean said immediately. "The Phoenix, No. Scott grabbed her arm. You've already burned yourself out sealing the fracture. One more surge like that, and I'll die. Jean finished calmly. But the rest of you will survive. The rebellion will survive. Earth will be safe. That's an acceptable trade. Like hell it is, Logan snarled. We didn't drag you back from cosmic fire just to watch you throw yourself into it again. Charles held up his hand for silence. Through the viewport, the first wave of TIE fighters was visible. Distant specks growing rapidly larger. 3 minutes, maybe less. There's another option, he said quietly. I can seal the gateway telepathically. Pour my consciousness into the dimensional boundary, use my power to stabilize it from within. It would require everything I have, but it would work. Professor, no, Kurt began. It's the logical choice, Charles continued, his voice firm. Jean has the Phoenix Force. The rebellion will need that power in the fights to come. The rest of you are field operatives, combatants. But me, I'm an old man in a chair. My value to this fight is limited compared to... Stop. Aurora's voice cut through his rationalization like a blade. She floated down from the shuttle's ceiling, where she'd been monitoring weather patterns, her eyes blazing white with suppressed emotion. You are our teacher, our leader, our conscience. Do not dare diminish your worth by reducing it to combat capability. Storm's right, Scott added. We need you, Professor. Not just for your telepathy, but for your wisdom. You're the one who keeps us from becoming weapons. Without you, without me, you'll do what you've always done, Charles said gently. You'll be heroes. You'll fight for those who cannot fight for themselves. You'll be X-Men. He smiled, and there was pride in it, and love, and terrible sadness. I've trained you well. You don't need me anymore. The hell we don't. Logan's claws extended involuntarily. Chuck, I've followed you for years because you made me believe I was more than just a weapon. You don't get to bail on us now. Through the shuttle's comm system, General Dodonna's voice crackled with urgency. X-Men, we're out of time. The Executor is launching boarding craft. Whatever you're going to do, we're staying, Charles said into the comm, making the decision before anyone could argue further. And we're going to need a distraction. General, can you buy us 90 seconds? A pause. Then, we can try. May the Force be with you, Professor. And with you. Charles turned to his team. Here's what's going to happen. I will seal the gateway, ensuring Earth's safety. The rest of you will. We'll stay right here, Jean interrupted, her voice carrying an edge of cosmic authority that made everyone pause. Professor, you taught me something important when you helped me control the Phoenix. You said power without purpose is just destruction. But purpose without power is martyrdom. She stood, wobbly but determined. You want to seal the gateway? Fine. But you're not doing it alone. She placed her hands on Charles's shoulders, and the Phoenix marks on her skin blazed bright. Rogue, I need you again. And Scott, Kurt, everyone. We're going to form a psychic circuit, just like we did to reach me when I was lost. Professor provides the telepathic control. I provide the raw power. Together, we seal the gateway properly, and nobody dies. John, the energy requirements, Hank began, are irrelevant if we share the burden, Jean finished. That's what we've been learning, isn't it? Together, we can do things none of us could do alone. Isn't that what the X-Men have always been about? Charles looked at his student. The woman who'd grown from a frightened teenager into someone who could bargain with cosmic forces, and felt his carefully constructed sacrifice play crumbling. She was right. Of course she was right. The X-Men's greatest strength had never been individual power, but collective purpose. 30 seconds until gateway closure, Hank announced. 29, 28. Everyone, hands joined, Charles commanded. Jean at the center. I'll provide the telepathic framework. Jean channels the power. The rest of you anchor us with your will, your memories, everything that makes us who we are. They formed a circle in the shuttle's cargo bay. 8 mutants from another universe, holding hands like children playing a game. Through the open ramp, the crystalline gateway shimmered, Earth visible through its heart. And beyond it, the Imperial fleet descended like a hammer. 15 seconds, Hank counted. 14. Charles reached out with his telepathy, linking their minds into a perfect network. Through Jean, he felt the Phoenix force, not hostile now, but curious, almost playful. It wanted to know what these strange beings would do next. 10 seconds. Jean drew power from the Phoenix, but carefully, incrementally, sharing it across the psychic network so no single person bore the full weight. It felt like trying to hold lightning, but together, they could contain it. 5 seconds. Now, Charles shouted. The psychic circuit released, channeling controlled Phoenix energy directly into the crystalline gateway. Not to destroy it, but to complete it. To finish the dimensional healing Jean and Rogue had started, to seal the pathway so thoroughly that not even Sith alchemy could ever reopen it. The gateway flared brilliant gold, and for one perfect moment, Charles felt something impossible. He sensed minds on the other side. Students at the Xavier Institute, wondering why they all suddenly felt their headmaster's presence. Minds that had given up the X-Men for dead, now briefly touching them one final time. Goodbye, Charles projected across dimensions. We're alive, we're together, and we're exactly where we need to be. Then the gateway sealed, crystallized completely, and shattered into harmless quantum foam that dispersed into the atmosphere like golden snow. The pathway home was gone. Forever. In the shuttle, 8 X-Men collapsed, the psychic strain leaving them gasping. But they were alive. All of them, together. Well, Logan said after a moment, his voice hoarse. Guess we're committed now. Gateway sealed successfully, Hank confirmed, checking his instruments. No residual dimensional instability. Earth is safe. We are stranded. Through the viewport, the Imperial fleet loomed large. The Executor's dagger-shaped silhouette dominated the sky, TIE fighters swarming around it like angry insects. The Rebel fleet was in full retreat, shields failing under turbo-laser bombardment. Now what? Rogue asked. Charles Xavier straightened in his repulsor chair, exhaustion falling away as purpose reasserted itself. Now we show Darth Vader what happens when you corner the X-Men. We didn't choose this galaxy, but we choose to defend it. We choose to fight. He looked at each of them in turn. We may never see Earth again, but we can make sure this galaxy has a chance to be free. Agreed? Agreed, they answered. One voice, absolute. Then let's get to work. Charles activated the comm. General Dodonna, this is Professor Xavier. The X-Men are staying, and we're going to need a bigger ship. On the bridge of the Executor, Darth Vader felt the disturbance in the Force, the gateway's closure, the choice the mutants had made. They could have fled, could have escaped. Instead, they chose to stay and fight. For a moment, something that might have been respect flickered in the ruins of Anakin Skywalker's heart. These beings understood sacrifice. understood duty, which made them even more dangerous. "Deploy all fighters," Vader commanded. "Intensify forward batteries. I want those ships disabled, not destroyed. The mutants have chosen this galaxy as their battlefield. Very well. Let us teach them the price of that choice." But as the Executor advanced and the battle commenced, neither Vader nor Charles Xavier knew the truth. They were both pieces on a board manipulated by a far more ancient player. In his throne room on Coruscant, Emperor Palpatine watched the unfolding battle through the Force. The gateway had closed. The mutants had committed themselves to this universe. Perfect. Now they couldn't run, couldn't hide, couldn't escape what was coming. "Lord Vader," he transmitted, "take one of them. I don't care which. Bring them to me alive. I wish to understand what they are before I decide how they die." And in the swirling chaos of Dantooine's orbit, where X-Men and rebels fought desperately against overwhelming Imperial might, none of them knew that Palpatine had already laid his trap. One of them would fall. One of them would be taken. And through that one, the Emperor would learn to destroy them all. The battle above Dantooine was a swirling vortex of fire and metal. The rebel fleet, nimble and desperate, danced a deadly ballet against the Imperial Star Destroyer's brute force. The Redemption shuddered under a fresh volley of turbolaser fire, its shields flaring a desperate, failing crimson. Inside the shuttle, the X-Men felt the impact like a physical blow. The choice was made, the gateway was sealed, and the cost of their commitment was now being extracted in blood and ionized energy. "We're sitting ducks in this shuttle," Scott stated, his tactical mind cutting through the emotional residue of their sacrifice. "We need to get back to the Redemption now. It has the firepower and command structure we need to coordinate a defense. The space between here and there is a shooting gallery," Logan growled, peering out the viewport at the streaks of laser fire. "One direct hit and we're stardust." "Then we do not take the shuttle," Aurora said, her voice calm despite the chaos. "Kurt, can you make the jumps?" Kurt's yellow eyes widened as he assessed the maelstrom outside. "The distance, the moving targets. It would be the most dangerous series of jumps I have ever attempted. One miscalculation and I materialize inside a bulkhead or floating in vacuum." "We don't have a choice," Jean said, her voice strained but determined. She was leaning heavily on Scott, the after effects of the Phoenix exertion still weighing her down. "I can use my telekinesis to create a small buffer around you, to nudge you clear of any large debris or energy blasts. It won't stop a laser bolt, but it might keep you from materializing inside a TIE fighter." "A might and a maybe," Kurt muttered, crossing himself. "But for my family, I will try." He looked at the team. "Who first?" "The Professor," Scott said without hesitation. "He's our command center. Then Jean and Rogue, they're our heaviest hitters, but they're exhausted. Then the rest of us." The plan was insane. It was a testament to their trust in one another that no one argued. Kurt grabbed Charles's repulsor chair. "Hold on, Professor," Kurt said, a nervous grin flashing across his face. "This will be bumpy." Bamf. They vanished in a cloud of sulfurous smoke. The shuttle fell silent for 3 heartbeats, then 4. Scott watched the comms, his knuckles white. A crackle. Charles's voice, clear and calm. "We are aboard the Redemption. Kurt is returning for John and Rogue. Stand by." The second jump was even riskier. Kurt returned, panting. "The bridge is chaos, but we made it. Ready, ladies?" Jean and Rogue joined hands with him. Rogue gave a weak thumbs up. "Don't drop us, Elf." Bamf. This time, the wait was longer. Alarms blared on the shuttle as a near miss from a turbolaser shook them violently. Finally, Kurt reappeared, stumbling this time. A burn mark seared across his shoulder. "A close one with a laser cannon," he gasped. "The girls are safe. Who's next?" One by one, Kurt ferried them through the hellscape of the battle. With each jump, he grew more fatigued, his teleportation becoming less precise. When he arrived to take Logan and Aurora, the last two, he was leaning against the shuttle wall, his tail drooping. "This is the last one, my friends," he breathed. "I do not have the energy for another." "Then make it count," Logan said, clapping a hand on his shoulder. As Kurt focused, a massive explosion rocked the Redemption. Through the viewport, they saw one of the rebel frigates vanish in a fireball. The comms erupted with panicked shouts. "They've broken through the starboard flank. All fighters, converge. Shields are down to 20%. The Executor is launching boarding pods." Kurt, startled by the blast, lost his concentration for a critical second. He grabbed Logan and Aurora and teleported. The world dissolved into the familiar, nauseating blur of the Banff dimension. But something was wrong. The tunnel of New Ku de Kongjian felt unstable, shuddering around them. They rematerialized not on the familiar bridge of the Redemption, but in a dimly lit, cold corridor. They were aboard the Executor. The air was different. Sterile, recycled, and heavy with the implied threat of Imperial authority. The hum of the ship was deeper, more menacing than the rebel frigates. Alarms blared here too, but they were the harsh, authoritative tones of an empire hunting prey on its own turf. "My God," Kurt whispered, horrified. I miscalculated. The explosion, the ship's movement, I'm so sorry." "Save the apologies," Logan snarled, his claws sliding out with a snick. "We're in the belly of the beast. Now we gotta get out." Aurora's eyes flickered white. "I feel nothing. No wind, no moisture. This ship is a tomb of metal and recycled air. My power is useless here." A squad of stormtroopers rounded the corner, their white armor gleaming under the harsh lights. "Intruders! Blast them!" Logan was on them in an instant, a whirlwind of adamantium and fury. He moved with a brutal efficiency that was terrifying to behold, claws deflecting blaster bolts and cutting through armor with gut-wrenching ease. In less than 10 seconds, the squad lay incapacitated on the deck. "We can't fight the whole ship," Aurora said, her voice tight. "We need to find a hangar, steal a ship. And I need to concentrate to teleport us out of here," Kurt added, "which is impossible with every stormtrooper on the ship hunting us." A new voice, mechanized and cold as deep space, echoed down the corridor. It came from the ship's intercom, but felt as if it were spoken directly into their souls. "You are trespassers on my ship. Darth Vader, the mutant known as Wolverine. Your resilience is noted, the one called Storm. Your power is neutered in my sanctum, and the teleporter, your usefulness is at an end." The corridor ahead of them sealed with a blast door. The one behind them did the same. They were trapped. "He's hurting us," Logan growled. Vader's voice returned, dripping with dark satisfaction. "You made a choice to stay in this galaxy. You chose to fight. A noble, if foolish, sentiment. Now you will learn the consequence of that choice. You will be separated. You will be broken. And you will be studied." Vents in the ceiling hissed open, pouring a thick, colorless gas into the corridor. It smelled of ozone and something cloyingly sweet. "Neurotoxin," Aurora gasped, covering her mouth. "I cannot disperse it." Kurt coughed, his vision blurring. "I cannot. Focus. Logan roared, slashing at the blast door. But the durasteel was too thick, even for his claws. He could feel the toxin burning in his lungs, but his healing factor fought it, metabolizing the poison as fast as it could enter his system. He watched in helpless rage as Aurora and Kurt slumped to the floor, unconscious. He stood over their fallen forms, claws bared, a cornered animal facing an invisible hunter. The gas thickened, and even his legendary metabolism began to falter. His head swam, his limbs grew heavy. The last thing he saw before darkness took him was the blast door sliding open and the towering, black-armored form of Darth Vader stepping through, his crimson lightsaber igniting with a snap hiss that was the final, definitive sound of defeat. On the bridge of the Redemption, Charles Xavier suddenly cried out, his hands flying to his temples. "Professor!" Scott yelled, rushing to his side. "They're gone," Charles whispered, his face a mask of agony and fury. "I felt them. Their minds. A sudden pressure and then silence. Kurt's was the last. Terror, disorientation, then nothing. Vader has them." The remaining X-Men stood in horrified silence on the shaking bridge. They had chosen to stay. They had chosen to fight. And the Empire had just taken their first payment. The silence on the bridge of the Redemption was heavier than any turbolaser impact. Charles Xavier's announcement hung in the air, a death knell for their fleeting hope. They had sealed the gateway, committed to this war, and in return, the galaxy had taken 3 of their own. Scott Summers' hands clenched into fists so tight his knuckles were white. "Where?" he demanded, his voice a low, dangerous rasp. "Where are they, Professor?" Charles's eyes were closed, his consciousness cast like a net across the void, searching for the faintest psychic echo. "The Executor," he said finally, his voice hollow. "Their minds are suppressed. Not dead, but veiled. It's a technique I've never encountered, a psychic dampening field, likely Sith in origin. I can feel their presence, a dull ache in the Force. But I cannot reach them." "Vader," Jean whispered. The name a curse. The golden patterns on her skin, which had been fading, flared with a faint, angry light. "He's taken them to the heart of his power." General Dodonna approached, his face grim. "Professor, the Imperial fleet is breaking off. They've achieved their objective. They're moving to hyperspace." On the main viewport, the colossal shape of the Executor turned, its escorting star destroyers falling into formation. Then, with a silent, star-streaked leap, they vanished. The remaining TIE fighters, now leaderless, were quickly mopped up by the battered rebel forces. The battle was over. The Empire had won. "We have to go after them," Rogue said, her voice shaking with a mixture of exhaustion and fury. "We can't just let Vader have them." "Go after them how?" Hank McCoy interjected, his tone uncharacteristically sharp. He gestured to the crippled rebel fleet. "The Redemption's hyperdrive is damaged. We've lost 1/3 of our ships. Charging after the most powerful warship in the Imperial fleet into the core systems is not a rescue mission. It's a suicide pact." "So we do nothing?" Rogue shot back, tears of frustration in her eyes. "We let Logan, Storm, and Nightcrawler rot in some Imperial dungeon?" "No," Charles said, his voice regaining its steely composure. The leader was re-emerging from the shell of the grieving friend. "We do not do nothing, but we must be strategic. Rage without a plan is what the Empire expects. What Vader expects." He turned his chair to face the team. "Hank is correct. A direct assault is impossible. But the Empire does not know everything about us." He looked at Jean. The psychic dampener. You felt it too? Jean nodded, her expression focused. It's like a black noise. But when Kurt was taken, for a split second I felt something else. Not the dampener, but a connection. The Phoenix remembers the taste of Vader's darkness. It's a beacon, even through the static. A beacon we can follow, Charles concluded. But not with ships, with the mind. Scott shook his head. Professor, a psychic assault on the Executor? With you and Jean still recovering? That's as suicidal as a frontal attack. Not an assault, Scott. A whisper. A plan was forming in Charles's mind. A desperate, brilliant gamble. Vader believes he has caged them. He believes their powers are neutralized. But he does not understand the nature of our bond. He is a master of the Force, which binds all living things. But he is not a telepath of our caliber. He may block their powers, but can he block a memory? A feeling? He looked at each of them. Ororo's faith is her anchor. Logan's loyalty is his rage. Kurt's hope is his prayer. We cannot break the dampener, but we can send a message through it. We can remind them they are not alone. And if Vader detects you? Hank asked, concerned. Then the game changes, Charles said grimly. But it is a risk we must take. Jean, I need you. Not the Phoenix, not yet. Just your strength as my student. We will link minds, and we will cast a thought into the darkness, aimed at that beacon. In the meditation chamber aboard the Executor, Darth Vader observed his captives. Wolverine was sealed in a reinforced carbonite frame. His healing factor constantly fighting a sedative drip that would have killed a bantha. Storm and Nightcrawler were held in separate, isolated cells, their rooms flooded with the same neural dampening field. They were awake, but trapped in a featureless gray void, unable to access their powers, unable to even feel the world around them. It was a perfect prison. Vader turned as the door hissed open. Emperor Palpatine's hologram flickered to life, his yellow eyes burning with interest. You have them, the Emperor rasped. The resilient one, the Weather Witch, and the teleporter, Vader confirmed. The others escaped aboard the rebel frigate. No matter. These three will provide the key. The Grand Inquisitor failed to break the Phoenix, but these are different. Their powers are physical, tangible. We will learn their limits. We will find their weaknesses. Palpatine's gaze fell upon Logan. Begin with that one. His body heals itself. Discover how. Discover if that ability can be transferred. Vader gave a curt nod. It will be done, Master. As the hologram faded, Vader stood over Logan's frozen form. He reached out with the Force, probing the mutant's unique biology, a puzzle of accelerated cellular regeneration and unbreakable metal. And in that moment, deep within the suppressed mind of Ororo Monroe, a whisper cut through the gray static. It was not a word. It was a feeling. The smell of rain on fresh earth. The feeling of wind on her face. The memory of Charles's study, warm and safe. The X-Men gathered around her. Her eyes, which had been vacant and defeated, flickered with a minute spark of white. In another cell, Kurt Wagner, who had been praying silently in German, suddenly felt a warmth. It was the memory of laughter in the danger room, the feeling of a BAMF, the joy of movement, the unwavering certainty that he was loved. A small, desperate smile touched his lips. And in his carbonite prison, Logan's subconscious, a feral thing of pure instinct, received a different message. A single, clear image. John's face, not as she was now, but as the young girl he had sworn to protect. A memory of a promise. A low, guttural growl echoed in the confines of his mind. They were not broken. They were reminded. Back on the Redemption, Charles and Jean broke the connection, both sweating and pale. "It is done," Charles breathed. "The seed is planted." "Vader felt it," Jean said, her voice trembling. "Not the message, but the energy. He knows we're looking for them." "Let him know," Scott said, his voice cold and hard. He walked to the comm station. "General Dodonna, what's the status of the nearest rebel shipyard? We need repairs, and we need them yesterday. There's a mobile station in the Roche asteroid belt, but it's a risk." "Take the risk," Scott interrupted. "We're not running anymore. We're not just surviving." He turned to face the team, his visor hiding his eyes, but not the grim determination in his stance. "The Empire took 3 of ours. We're going to show them what happens when you make the X-Men angry. We're going to build a weapon." He looked at Hank. "You said you needed a massive power source to potentially open a gateway. How about a power source to blow a Star Destroyer out of the sky instead?" Hank adjusted his glasses, a slow, calculating smile spreading across his features. "Theoretically, by repurposing the dimensional resonance scanner and channeling it through a focused energy lens. Yes, I believe we could." The war for the galaxy had just begun, but for the X-Men, it had become personal. The mobile repair station, codenamed Anchorite, was a sprawling, ungainly collection of modules and dry docks hidden within the dense mineral field of the Roche asteroid belt. It was a place of echoes and sparks, the air thick with the smell of ozone, welding torches, and recycled air. The crippled Redemption was clamped in its largest dock, a swarm of repair droids and engineers working furiously to patch its hull and replace its damaged hyperdrive motivator. But the real work was happening in the station's main research lab, a cavernous space that had been completely commandeered by Hank McCoy. Blueprints and equations covered every available surface, both physical and holographic. At the center of the chaos stood a monstrous assembly of parts cannibalized from damaged X-wings, a salvaged Imperial shield generator, and the core component, Hank's dimensional resonance scanner, now heavily modified. Wires snaked across the floor like metallic vines, connecting to banks of humming power cells. "The principle is a perversion of my original research," Hank explained to Scott and Charles, his voice a mix of scientific fervor and profound unease. He gestured to the central emitter, a crystalline lens that pulsed with a faint, sickly green light. "Instead of using a controlled energy burst to gently probe dimensional boundaries, we are going to violently resonate them. We are essentially creating a localized, targeted reality fracture. A weapon that tears a hole in the universe," Charles said, his tone heavy with distaste. "A very small, very temporary hole," Hank corrected. "But the energy released from even a pinprick breach between dimensions is astronomical. It should bypass any known shield technology, as it's not an energy weapon per se, but a fundamental attack on the local space-time continuum. A single shot would destabilize the molecular integrity of a Star Destroyer's hull, causing it to unravel." Scott studied the schematics, his tactical mind assessing the weapon not as a scientific marvel, but as a tool. Range, charge time, collateral damage. Short range. We'd need to be dangerously close to the Executor. Charge time is approximately 90 seconds, during which we would be a glowing beacon on every Imperial scanner. As for collateral damage, Hank sighed, removing his glasses to polish them. "The fracture is temporary. But the release of exotic particles is not. Any ship caught in the blast radius would suffer catastrophic systems failure. And there is a non-zero chance that repeated use could cause a cascading instability, similar to what we saw on Dantooine, but on a much larger scale. It's a doomsday weapon, Jean said from the doorway. She and Rogue had been listening silently. The phoenix marks on her skin seemed to pulse in time with the machine's low hum, as if in conversation with it. We're talking about fighting the Empire's tyranny by using a power that could accidentally destroy the very galaxy we're trying to save. What's the alternative, Jeannie? Rogue asked, her arms crossed. Her voice was hard. We tried being heroes. We tried doing the right thing. And the Empire took our friends. They're not fighting with one hand tied behind their back. Why should we? Rogue is not entirely wrong, Jean, Charles said, though the words seemed to pain him. We are facing an enemy for whom genocide is standard policy. The Death Star is proof of that. This weapon, as horrifying as it is, may be the only thing that gives us the leverage to free our friends and strike a meaningful blow. Leverage? Jean's voice rose. Professor, look at it. This isn't leverage. This is corruption. This is us becoming what we've always fought against. We'd be no better than the people who built Sentinels. The Sentinels were built to hunt us. Scott's voice cut through the argument, sharp and final. This is different. This is a surgical tool. One shot. We use it to disable the Executor, we board it. We extract our people, and we destroy the weapon. No planets burn, no star systems die. One ship, one mission. The room fell silent, the weight of the decision pressing down on them. The hum of the prototype weapon filled the void. Hank, Scott said, his voice quieter now. Can you mount it on the Redemption? Hank nodded slowly. The forward ventral hardpoint. It will require rerouting primary power from life support and artificial gravity for the charge sequence. It will be uncomfortable for everyone aboard. Do it. As Hank and a team of rebel engineers began the dangerous work of installing the weapon, Charles wheeled himself over to Joan, who was staring at the pulsating core with undisguised dread. You feel it, don't you? He said softly, his telepathy creating a private channel between them. The Phoenix's reaction. It is hungry, Jean thought back, her mental voice thick with revulsion. It sees this weapon not as a tool, but as a kindred spirit, a thing of pure, unchecked destruction. Every time they test it, I can feel it, stirring. You controlled it before, Jean. You and Rogue together. This is different, Professor. Before, we were healing a wound. This is about to become an open invitation to make more. I'm not sure I can say no if it asks to help. Charles had no answer for that. He could only watch as his students, his children, prepared to cross a line from which there might be no return. 2 days later, the Redemption, scarred but space-worthy again, detached from the anchorite. On its belly, partially concealed by armored plating, was the weapon they had christened the Dimension Ripper. The mood aboard was grim, focused. They had a target. They had a plan. They dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Bormea sector, where long-range rebel scouts had tracked the Executor's course. The Star Destroyer hung in the void like a black dagger, surrounded by its attendant fleet, a symbol of absolute power. All hands, battle stations. Scott's voice was calm over the ship-wide intercom. He stood on the bridge, his gaze fixed on the enemy flagship. Hank, begin the charge sequence. Initiating. Hank's voice came back, strained. Rerouting power now. The lights on the bridge dimmed. A deep, resonant hum vibrated through the deck plates. a sound that felt fundamentally wrong. On the main viewer, the Dimension Ripper began to glow, the green light intensifying, swirling like a captive storm. Aboard the Executor, the alarm was immediate. "Lord Vader, an energy spike from the Rebel frigate. It's not matching any known weapon signature. The output is climbing beyond anything in our databases." Vader turned from the viewport, where he had been contemplating the stars. He had felt it too. A gathering wrongness in the Force, a screeching dissonance that grated against the natural order. "They have come for their comrades," he intoned. "They have brought something new, something impure." He ignited his lightsaber. "All batteries, target that vessel. Destroy it." The Executor's massive turbolaser batteries swiveled, glowing with malevolent energy. On the Redemption, the hum became a deafening whine. 80% charge," Hank reported. "They're targeting us. Shields are failing." "Hold course," Scott ordered. "Scott." Jean's voice was a whisper over the comm, laced with cosmic terror. "It's asking." "The Phoenix, it wants to help." "No, we do this our way." A volley of green turbolaser fire streaked toward them. The Redemption shuddered violently. "Shields are down. Hull breach on Deck 7. 95%. Vader watched, his satisfaction warring with a strange, unfamiliar prickle of alarm. The Rebel ship was not firing back. It was simply soaking up the punishment, its strange weapon glowing brighter, the wrongness intensifying. They were not trying to fight. They were trying to unleash something. "Full power to forward shields," Vader commanded, a rare note of urgency in his mechanized voice. He felt it now, a tear in the fabric of reality, a scream from the universe itself. On the Redemption, a final piercing shriek echoed from the weapon. 100%. Dimension Ripper is charged. Scott took a deep breath. This was it, the point of no return. "Fire," the command was given, but the universe seemed to hesitate. Then the Dimension Ripper fired. There was no coherent beam of light, no explosive projectile. Instead, a sphere of absolute wrongness, a blot of shimmering, non-Euclidean darkness shot from the Redemption's belly. It moved with a silence that was more deafening than any explosion, swallowing the light and sound around it as it traveled. It struck the Executor's forward shields. The result was not a collision, but an unraveling. The powerful deflector shields, designed to withstand the fury of capital ship broadsides, simply ceased to exist where the sphere touched them. It was as if the concept of shield was being erased from that localized patch of space. The sphere continued, unimpeded, and made contact with the Star Destroyer's Durasteel hull. The effect was horrifying. The iconic dagger-shaped hull of the Executor didn't melt or explode. It dissolved. A quarter-kilometer-wide section of the ship, from the forward command tower down through dozens of decks, silently turned into a cloud of shimmering, disassociated particles. Structural supports, armor plating, power conduits, and the people inside them, all were reduced to their component atoms in an instant. The edges of the wound glowed with a sickly, persistent green energy. The dimensional fracture fighting to close itself, continuing to eat away at the surrounding metal. A silent, expanding cloud of debris was all that marked the weapon's impact point. On the bridge of the Redemption, the crew stared in stunned, horrified silence. They had just witnessed a fundamental law of physics being broken. "Target neutralized," a sensor officer whispered, his voice trembling. "The Executor is dead in the void. Hank reported, his own voice thick with a scientist's awe and self-loathing. "Primary power is gone. Life support is failing across 60% of the ship. They're bleeding atmosphere and bodies." Scott didn't allow himself to feel the horror. He compartmentalized it, locking it away with all the other traumas. "Good. Launch boarding craft. Team Alpha, Jean, Rogue, with me. We're going in. Hank, you have the bridge. Professor, coordinate." As they rushed to the hangar bay, Jean grabbed Scott's arm. Her eyes were wide, the pupils dilated. "Scott, the scream. Did you hear it?" "There was no sound, John. Not with your ears," she whispered. "The universe itself, it felt that. The Phoenix is ecstatic." Aboard the crippled Executor, chaos was absolute. Emergency lights cast a bloody glow on corridors filled with smoke and the screams of the dying. The artificial gravity flickered, sending bodies and debris floating before slamming them down again. In his meditation chamber, Darth Vader rose from the wreckage of his console. The impact had thrown him across the room. Damage reports scrolled across shattered screens, but he ignored them. He reached out with the Force, feeling the great ship's death throes, the immense loss of life. And he felt something else, the lingering taint of the dimensional weapon, a psychic scar that felt like a blasphemy. And cutting through that scar, he felt them. The mutants. They were here. His rage, cold and absolute, became a focal point in the Force. He would not be humiliated on his own ship. He would not lose his prizes. He ignited his lightsaber, the crimson blade a promise of vengeance in the gloom. All remaining security teams to the detention block. The prisoners are not to be moved. Meanwhile, the X-Men's shuttle, call sign Blackbird in a nod to home, sliced through the Executor's compromised hull, landing roughly in a mangled hangar bay. "No resistance," Scott noted, his visor scanning the area. "They're too busy trying to keep the ship from tearing itself apart." "This way," Jean said, her eyes closed, one hand pressed to her temple. "I can feel them. The dampening field is failing with the power. Their minds are screaming." They moved as a unit, a well-oiled machine of destruction. Scott's optic blasts carved through sealed blast doors. Rogue, having absorbed the strength and combat skills of a dozen rebel commandos during the battle, moved with a brutal, efficient grace, dismantling any stormtrooper squad foolish enough to challenge them. They found Kurt first. His cell door was warped, the locking mechanism fused. Scott melted it open. The teleporter was huddled in a corner, trembling, but his eyes lit up when he saw them. "Meine Freunde, I knew you would come." "Where are the others?" Scott demanded. "This way. I saw them take Herr Logan to the laboratories. Fräulein Aurora is down the hall." They freed Aurora, who emerged from her cell not with relief, but with a gathering storm in her eyes. The sterile, recycled air of the Executor began to stir, a faint breeze whispering through the broken corridors. "Vader," was all she said, her voice the calm before the hurricane. The laboratory level was a scene of nightmare. The Dimension Ripper's blast had sheared through part of it, opening sections to the vacuum of space, which had been hastily sealed with emergency force fields. In the center of the main lab, Logan was still encased in his carbonite frame, but it was now connected by a web of tubes and wires to sinister-looking machines. Imperial scientists, now dead or fled, had been in the process of attempting to synthesize his healing factor. "Logan!" Jean cried out, her telekinesis ripping the machinery from the wall. As the last tube disconnected, the carbonite shell hissed open. Logan stumbled out, naked and disoriented, but his eyes burned with feral rage. He took one look at the situation, at his teammates, and his claws slid out. "Vader," he growled, the word a promise of violence. It was then that the air grew cold. The emergency lights flickered, and the crimson blade illuminated the doorway. Darth Vader stood there, a monument of dark side power. The very atmosphere thickened with his malice. "You have damaged my ship," he boomed, his voice resonating with pure, undiluted fury. "You have slain my crew, but you will not take what is mine." He raised a hand, and Jean, Scott, and Rogue were lifted into the air, choking as an invisible grip tightened around their throats. Aurora cried out, summoning a blast of wind that Vader simply absorbed, redirecting the energy to shatter the viewport behind him, the emergency force field shimmering as it held back the void. Kurt teleported behind Vader, but the Dark Lord was ready, backhanding him with a telekinetic blow that sent the teleporter crashing into a wall. Only Logan was unaffected, his healing factor an adamantium skeleton resisting the force choke. With a roar that was more animal than man, he launched himself at Vader. It was a whirlwind of adamantium and plasma. Logan was a blur of slashing claws, each strike aimed to kill. Vader moved with preternatural speed, his lightsaber a crimson wall, deflecting every blow. Sparks flew as adamantium met energy blade. Logan's flesh sizzled and healed, but he was driven back, unable to break Vader's defense. "You are a beast," Vader intoned, "and I will break you." He unleashed a torrent of force lightning, not from his hands, but from the very air around them. It arced across the room, striking Logan full in the chest. The mutant screamed, his body convulsing as his healing factor fought a desperate, losing battle against the Sith Lord's power. "No!" Jean's cry was not her own. It was layered with the voice of a cosmic entity. The golden patterns on her skin erupted into full, brilliant flame. The Phoenix Force, invited by the rampant destruction and the threat to its host's family, manifested completely. The telekinetic grip on her shattered. She floated to the floor, wreathed in fire, her hair streaming in an unseen solar wind. Her eyes were pools of white-hot energy. "You hurt my family," the Phoenix Jean spoke, her voice the harmony of a star's birth cry. She raised a hand, and Vader's force lightning was snuffed out. She raised her other hand, and Vader himself was lifted, his durative armor groaning under a pressure that dwarfed his own telekinetic might. For the first time, Darth Vader knew true, primal fear. This was not the Force. This was something else, something ancient and hungry. The Phoenix Jean smiled, a terrible, beautiful sight. "Let's see how you burn." The laboratory ceased to be a room and became the center of a star. Phoenix Jean hovered at its heart, an avatar of cosmic judgment. The air itself caught fire, not with heat, but with raw creation and destruction. Consoles melted, not from temperature, but from the sheer impossibility of her presence. Darth Vader, the terror of the galaxy, was a doll in her grip. He hung in the air, his dark armor straining, his respirator cycling frantically. He threw waves of force energy at her. Telekinetic blasts that could crumple starfighters, mind-shattering assaults that would have turned a Jedi Master's brain to pulp. They dissipated against her like ocean waves against a continent. "You are an aberration," Vader choked out, even as the pressure threatened to collapse his suit. "I am life. I am death. I am fire." The Phoenix voice echoed, a chorus of a billion souls. "And you are a flicker I will snuff out." She began to squeeze. The dura-steel of his chest plate shrieked in protest. From within the armor, a different scream began, weaker, human. The man inside the machine was being crushed. "Jean, stop!" Professor Xavier's voice cut through the psychic maelstrom, a needle of pure will. He was still aboard the Redemption, but his telepathy bridged the space between them, a lifeline thrown into a hurricane. "This is not the way, Jean. This is the corruption we feared. This is the Phoenix's rage, not yours." For a fraction of a second, the cosmic fire in Jean's eyes flickered, revealing a sliver of the woman within. Terror. Regret. He was going to kill Logan. He's taken everything from us. And if you kill him like this, he will have taken you too. Charles's mental voice was desperate, pleading. Remember who you are, Jean Grey. Remember the X-Men. The hesitation was all the opening Vader needed. With a final, monumental effort, he focused not on attacking the Phoenix, but on the environment. With a telekinetic shove that tore the deck plates apart, he hurled the still smoldering form of Wolverine directly at Jean. It was a brutal, calculated move. Jean's instinct to protect her friends overrode the Phoenix's desire to destroy. Her concentration broke for a microsecond to gently catch Logan with her telekinesis, cushioning his impact. That microsecond was enough. Vader crashed to the floor, his armor cracked and sparking. He didn't try to fight again. He vanished into the smoke and chaos, a wounded predator retreating to lick its wounds. The Phoenix energy around Jean wavered, the entity furious at being denied its prey. The fire receded, pulling back into her skin, which now glowed like heated coal. She collapsed to her knees, sobbing, the weight of what she had almost done crashing down on her. "Jeannie," Logan rasped, pulling himself up, his flesh still knitting itself back together. He put a hand on her shoulder, a gesture of profound understanding. He knew the beast within. The moment of respite was shattered by a new voice over the Executor's failing intercom. It was Hank, his voice tight with panic. "Scott, Jean, everyone, you have to get out of there now. The dimensional instability from the Ripper is cascading through the Executor's systems. The entire ship is becoming a massive reality fracture. It's going to tear itself apart and take everything in a 10,000-kilometer radius with it." Scott didn't hesitate. "Fall back, to the Blackbird, now." The escape was a blur. Kurt, despite his injuries, teleported the most wounded. Aurora used her control of the air to clear paths through the fires. Rogue carried Hank's schematics, her absorbed knowledge of Imperial ship layouts, guiding them through the labyrinth of dying corridors. They burst into the mangled hangar bay as the Executor began its final death throes. The very space around them twisted. Bulkheads melted into impossible shapes. Stormtroopers screamed as they were unmade, their molecules scattered across dimensions. The green energy from the Ripper's wound was spreading, a cancer consuming the mighty warship. The Blackbird's engines were already whining as they scrambled aboard. Scott took the pilot's seat, throwing the ship into a desperate launch as the hangar ceiling peeled away into the vortex of a reality storm. They shot clear just as the Executor's primary reactor went critical, its explosion not one of fire and light, but of silent, unraveling physics. The Star Destroyer and its entire escort fleet were consumed, twisted into a fleeting, beautiful, and horrifying kaleidoscope of colors that shouldn't exist, before vanishing completely. A perfect, silent sphere of nothingness was all that remained. On the bridge of the Redemption, Charles Xavier watched the void where a fleet had been. There was no victory in his heart, only ashes. The Blackbird docked, and the X-Men stumbled onto the hangar deck, battered, burned, but alive. They were all there. They were together. Logan, Aurora, and Kurt were free, But as they stood there, catching their breath in the sudden, ringing silence, Hank approached. A new set of readings on his datapad. His face was grim. The Dimension Ripper, it's gone. Destroyed in the backlash, as we planned. He took a deep breath. But the event, the destruction of the Executor, it created a permanent scar, a fixed reality fracture in the Bormia sector. It's stable, but it's a wound in the galaxy that will never heal. He looked at Jean, his expression one of pity and fear. And the energy signature. It's identical to the Phoenix. The galaxy just felt the Phoenix Force destroy the most powerful ship in the Imperial Navy. Jean wrapped her arms around herself, the glowing marks on her skin seeming to pulse in the dim light. She had become a legend, and the weight of it was crushing. Scott put an arm around her, but his gaze was on the starfield ahead. Then that's what we are now. That's our reputation. He turned to face the team, his voice low and steady. We're not going home. We can't. This is our war. And after today, the whole galaxy is going to be gunning for us. The Empire, the Rebellion, everyone. They had won. They had saved their friends. They had struck a blow that would echo through history. But as the redemption turned and leaped to hyperspace, leaving the silent scar behind, they all felt the same chilling truth. They had stopped being visitors. They had stopped being survivors. They had become the most dangerous thing in the galaxy. The destruction of the Executor sent shockwaves through the galaxy. But the truth was far stranger than any rumor. The Empire branded the X-Men as cosmic terrorists, while the Rebel Alliance viewed them with a mixture of awe and terror, a weapon too volatile to control. The X-Men found themselves in a liminal space, heroes to some, monsters to others, and wanted by all. They had achieved the impossible, but at a cost that would define their future. The path home was sealed forever, not by a closed gateway, but by the choices they had made and the power they had unleashed. They were no longer mutants lost in a galaxy far, far away. They were a fundamental part of its fabric, a new force of nature in the eternal struggle between light and dark. Their war was just beginning, and the galaxy would never be the same.